Imagine a world where today's modern society would be ahead of current time by centuries. How would today's society look like? One specific accident, or more specifically, prevention of it, could have made it happen. Bronze Age collapse. But what if the collapse never happened? Reaching technological singularity and AI by 250 CE. Achieving 20th century level science by 350 BCE. Iron Age, alphabetic literacy, and Greek philosophy all emerging centuries earlier.
What kind of implications would it have made to our modern daily life in early 2000s? Picture this, 1177 BCE. The Eastern Mediterranean is home to the most sophisticated civilizations Earth has ever seen. The Egyptian New Kingdom rules the Nile with architectural wonders that won't be surpassed for millennia. The Hittite Empire commands Anatolia with iron weapons and complex bureaucracy. Mycenaean Greeks build palaces with indoor plumbing and literary traditions. The Assyrians, Babylonians, and Canaanites trade across networks spanning thousands of kilometers. And then, suddenly, it all ended. But what if it didn't? Between 1200 and 1150 BCE, nearly every major city from Greece to Mesopotamia burned. Literacy disappeared across vast regions. International trade collapsed. The population of the Eastern Mediterranean dropped by an estimated 75%. Civilizations that had endured for centuries vanished within a single generation. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse, one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries and perhaps its most complete civilizational failure. But what if the collapse never happened? What if the interconnected Bronze Age civilizations weathered the crisis, adapted, and continued their trajectory of advancement for another 1,000 years? The implications would rewrite everything we know about human progress. Today, we journey through an alternative timeline, one where civilization didn't collapse, where the ancient world's momentum continued unbroken, and where humanity reached modernity a millennium before our own timeline achieved it.
Act 1. What if? Everything is not lost. 1177 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean faces a perfect storm of catastrophes. Climate records show a severe drought gripping the region, 3 consecutive years of failed harvests. Seismic evidence reveals a cluster of major earthquakes striking the Aegean and Anatolia. Archaeological sites show evidence of widespread violence and destruction, and mysterious groups that historians call the Sea Peoples appear in Egyptian records, raiding coastal settlements from all directions. In our timeline, this convergence of disasters proved too much. The interconnected Bronze Age civilizations, dependent on each other for tin, which is necessary for bronze, grain, and luxury goods, collapsed like dominoes. When one fell, the trade networks broke and others followed. The destruction was comprehensive. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, burned and abandoned. Mycenaean palaces across Greece destroyed. Ugarit, a wealthy Canaanite trading city, annihilated so completely that survivors never returned. Cyprus devastated by multiple waves of destruction. Even Egypt, which survived, entered a period of decline from which it never fully recovered. But in our alternative timeline, something different happened. The crisis came, but the civilizations didn't break. There were changes. What made the difference in this alternative timeline was a single, seemingly mundane innovation that appeared just before the crisis hit: diversified bronze production. In our timeline, bronze production depended on a precarious international tin trade. 10 mines existed only in specific locations, Afghanistan, Cornwall in Britain, and a few other sites. When trade routes collapsed, bronze production became impossible, and the societies dependent on bronze weapons and tools faced catastrophic shortages. But in the alternative timeline, Bronze Age metallurgists made a crucial discovery around 1200 BCE. Arsenic bronze could be produced from locally available materials in most regions without requiring international tin trade. This wasn't entirely fiction. Arsenic bronze existed in the real Bronze Age, but was largely abandoned because tin bronze had superior properties. In our alternative timeline, the renewed research into arsenic bronze occurred precisely when it was most needed, providing a stopgap that kept metallurgy functioning even when tin supplies were disrupted. The implications were profound. When the droughts came, when the earthquakes struck, when the sea peoples raided, the Bronze Age kingdoms didn't face simultaneous metallurgical collapse alongside their other crises. They could still produce weapons, tools, and agricultural implements. They could still defend themselves and maintain agricultural productivity. The crisis was severe, but manageable.
Egyptians intervened. The second difference in this alternative timeline came from Egypt. In our timeline, Pharaoh Ramesses III successfully defended Egypt against the Sea Peoples in a series of naval and land battles around 1180 to 1178 BCE. But he fought defensively, protecting Egypt's borders while the rest of the Eastern Mediterranean burned. In the alternative timeline, Ramesses III made a different strategic calculation. Egypt was the Bronze Age's superpower, wealthy, populous, and militarily dominant. When refugees began flooding into Egypt from destroyed Hittite and Canaanite cities, Ramesses faced a choice: seal the borders or intervene. He intervened. Between 1180 and 1175 BCE, Egyptian military expeditions sailed north to the Levant and Anatolia. But these weren't conquest campaigns, they were stabilization operations. Egyptian grain shipments fed starving populations. Egyptian troops helped defend cities under attack. Egyptian diplomatic missions brokered peace treaties between fractious kingdoms. Ramesses III essentially created the world's first international humanitarian intervention and peacekeeping operation. The motivations were practical, not altruistic. Egypt depended on Eastern Mediterranean trade for timber, metals, and luxury goods. If the entire region collapsed, Egypt's own prosperity would suffer. Better to spend resources stabilizing trade partners than to profit briefly from their destruction and then face long-term economic isolation. The Egyptian intervention succeeded, but barely. Perhaps 30% of Bronze Age cities were still destroyed between 1200 and 1170 BCE. Populations declined by 25 to 30% rather than 75%. Trade routes were disrupted for decades. But the interconnected civilizational system survived intact enough to recover. And then came the innovation explosion that changed everything. But the evidence forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility: that civilizational progress might require not just survival, but conscious choice to preserve connections, even when destruction seems easier. Act 2. And then there was the Iron Revolution. Historical reconstructions from this alternative timeline reveal something extraordinary. The transition from bronze to iron happened faster and more completely than in our own history. In our timeline, iron metallurgy developed slowly after the Bronze Age collapse. The Hittite monopoly on iron-working techniques was lost when their empire fell, and it took centuries for iron technology to spread and mature. Full Iron Age didn't arrive in the Mediterranean until around 1000 BCE, 2 centuries after the collapse. In the alternative timeline, the survival of the Hittite Empire meant iron technology spread through organized diplomatic channels rather than through chaotic diffusion after collapse. By 1150 BCE, Egyptian smiths were producing iron tools using techniques learned from Hittite specialists. By 1100 BCE, Mycenaean Greeks had established their own iron industries. By 1050 BCE, iron had largely replaced bronze for tools and weapons across the Eastern Mediterranean. The implications were revolutionary. Iron ore is vastly more abundant than copper and tin. Local production replaced international trade dependence. Tools became cheaper and more widely available. Agricultural productivity increased as iron plows could break harder soils. But more importantly, the technological advancement occurred within intact civilizational structures. Universities, in their Bronze Age form as temple schools and palace scribal colleges, remained functional. Knowledge was shared systematically rather than rediscovered piecemeal. Alphabets. The second major development emerged from the Phoenician coast. In our timeline, the Phoenician alphabet, ancestor of Greek, Latin, and most modern writing systems, developed around 1050 BCE in the aftermath of Bronze Age collapse, possibly as a simplified writing system for a society that had lost the scribal infrastructure to maintain complex syllabaries. But in the alternative timeline, the alphabet still emerged in a very different context. With Bronze Age scribal schools still functioning, the new alphabetic writing system didn't replace the old systems, it supplemented them. Cuneiform remained the language of diplomacy and scholarship. Egyptian hieroglyphics continued for religious and monumental purposes. But the simple Phoenician alphabet became the writing system of commerce and popular literacy. By 1000 BCE, merchant-class literacy rates in Phoenician and Greek cities reached 40 to 50%, unheard of in our timeline until the Roman Empire's peak. Libraries proliferated. The concept of public schools, initially for merchant families, began emerging in Greek city-states. The democratization of literacy accelerated everything that followed. Constitutional governments. The most remarkable discovery involves what happened when philosophical rationalism met political organization. In our timeline, democracy emerged in Athens around 508 BCE, after centuries of monarchies, tyrannies, and aristocratic oligarchies. It was a radical innovation without clear precedent. In the alternative timeline, the evolution toward representative government happened gradually, organically, starting around 900 BCE. Why? Because unbroken literacy and philosophical traditions meant political theory developed continuously. Mycenaean palace bureaucracies had always been relatively sophisticated, with written records, councils of advisors, and complex administrative hierarchies. As philosophical thinking matured, it inevitably turned toward questions of just governance. By 850 BCE, the first constitutions, written documents limiting royal power and establishing citizen rights, appeared in Greek city-states. By 800 BCE, limited representative assemblies existed in several cities. By 750 BCE, what we would recognize as democratic governance had emerged in multiple locations simultaneously. The implications were profound. Political experimentation occurred across dozens of city-states over centuries, creating a laboratory for governance systems. The most successful models spread through cultural influence rather than conquest. By 700 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean hosted multiple competing governmental systems: traditional monarchies in Egypt and Mesopotamia, constitutional monarchies in Anatolia, republican governments in Phoenician cities, and various forms of democracy in Greek city-states. The concept of legitimate government based on citizen consent rather than divine right had become mainstream 2,300 years before it would in our timeline. The Greek Philosophical Revolution. This brings us to perhaps the most significant divergence. Greek philosophy emerged 5 centuries earlier than in our timeline. In our history, Greek philosophy began with Thales of Miletus around 585 BCE, after centuries of recovery from the Bronze Age collapse. In the alternative timeline, with Mycenaean palace civilizations surviving and evolving, philosophical inquiry began around 1050 BCE. The difference wasn't just timing, it was continuity. In our timeline, Greek philosophy represented a radical break with Bronze Age religious and mythological thinking. In the alternative timeline, it represented evolution within an unbroken intellectual tradition. Mycenaean palace records from 1050 BCE show the first systematic inquiries into natural philosophy, questions about the nature of matter, the causes of motion, the principles underlying mathematics. These weren't yet the sophisticated systems of Plato or Aristotle, but they were the foundation. By 950 BCE, what historians call proto-Socratic philosophy had emerged, systematic inquiry into ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics. Schools of philosophy existed in Mycenae, Athens, and Thebes, patronized by palace bureaucracies that valued rational thinking for administration. By 850 BCE, alternative timeline Greek philosophy had achieved sophistication comparable to our timeline's Plato 700 years early. But this represents just one piece of a much larger puzzle hidden in how these intellectual developments transformed governance itself.
Science. But here's where it gets strange. All these political developments occurred alongside an explosion of scientific inquiry that makes our timeline's scientific revolution look delayed. By 700 BCE, alternative timeline Greek and Phoenician scholars had achieved scientific understanding equivalent to our Renaissance 1700 years early. Mathematics, Pythagorean theorem, and geometric principles were formalized by 800 BCE. Algebraic thinking emerged by 750 BCE. Calculus-like concepts appeared by 650 BCE. Astronomy. Heliocentric models of the solar system were proposed by 750 BCE, 2,000 years before Copernicus. Accurate measurements of Earth's size were achieved by 700 BCE, 1,100 years before Eratosthenes actually did it in our timeline. Medicine. Systematic anatomical study began around 800 BCE. Germ theory of disease emerged by 700 BCE, 2,200 years before Pasteur. Surgical techniques reached sophistication comparable to 19th century medicine. Engineering, steam power was achieved by 650 BCE, 2,200 years before the Industrial Revolution. Mechanical calculators existed by 600 BCE. The foundations of chemistry were established by 550 BCE. How was this possible? The answer lies in institutional continuity. In our timeline, each civilization that rose and fell had to rediscover knowledge lost in previous collapses. The alternative timeline maintained libraries, universities, and research traditions continuously for 600 years after the failed Bronze Age collapse. Each generation built incrementally on the last. Industrial Revolution. The evidence extends beyond pure science into the realm of technological transformation that fundamentally restructured society. By 600 BCE in the alternative timeline, the Eastern Mediterranean had entered its first industrial revolution, 1,600 years before our timeline's industrial revolution in Britain. Steam-powered pumps drained mines in Greek territories. Mechanical looms transformed textile production. Water wheels powered by engineered canals operated grain mills, sawmills, and metal workshops. Coal was mined and used for industrial heating. Blast furnaces produced steel in quantities that wouldn't be matched in our timeline until the 1800s. The city of Athens in 550 BCE had a population exceeding 400,000, sustained by industrial agriculture using mechanical reapers, irrigation systems, and fertilization techniques. The standard of living for urban workers was comparable to 19th century industrial workers in our timeline, but achieved over 2 millennia earlier. But the social transformation was different from our industrial revolution. Because it occurred gradually over 200+ years rather than explosively over 50 years, labor movements had time to organize. Because it occurred within societies with established philosophical traditions emphasizing ethics and justice, exploitation was limited by evolving moral frameworks. By 500 BCE, labor guilds had negotiated labor contracts, limiting working hours, establishing safety standards, and guaranteeing minimum wages. Child labor was largely prohibited. Universal education was becoming standard in major cities. It was industrialization with a human face because it happened slowly enough for society to adapt rather than being overwhelmed. And then came the discovery that would unite the entire Mediterranean world under a single, unprecedented political system. Act 3. How about the Mediterranean Confederation? What historians discovered studying this alternative timeline reveals a profound principle. When civilizations maintain connection through crisis, they eventually formalize those connections into lasting political structures. Around 500 BCE, representatives from Greek city-states, Phoenician trading republics, Egyptian provinces, and Anatolian kingdoms convened in Rhodes for what historians call the Great Assembly. The purpose? Create a permanent international organization to prevent future crises like the near collapse of 1200 BCE. What emerged was the Mediterranean Confederation, history's first large-scale democratic federal system. It wasn't a unified empire like Rome would later become in our timeline. Instead, it was something more sophisticated, a federation of autonomous states with shared institutions for collective defense, trade regulation, and conflict resolution. Each member state maintained internal sovereignty, but agreed to binding arbitration for interstate disputes, collective military defense, standardized weights and measures, and freedom of movement for citizens. A confederal assembly, with representatives proportional to population, made decisions on matters affecting the confederation as a whole. By 450 BCE, the Confederation included over 200 city-states and kingdoms, representing approximately 40 million people, the largest democratic polity that would exist until modern times. Philosophy. This forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the relationship between philosophy and governance. The Mediterranean Confederation wasn't just a political innovation, it was the practical application of centuries of philosophical development. The Confederation's founding documents, written around 500 BCE, read like philosophical treatises. They articulated principles that wouldn't appear in our timeline until Enlightenment philosophers: natural rights, separation of powers, checks and balances, rule of law, freedom of conscience, and equality before the law. But these weren't radical new ideas to the alternative timeline 500 BCE Mediterranean. They were the mature product of 500+ years of continuous philosophical evolution. Plato-equivalent philosophers had been debating ideal governance for generations. Aristotle-equivalent thinkers had systematically analyzed different political systems. The Confederation represented philosophy made practical, the first attempt to construct a large-scale polity based on rational principles rather than tradition, conquest, or divine authority. The results were remarkable. Warfare between Confederation members virtually ceased. Trade flourished in ways impossible under competing kingdoms. Scientific knowledge spread rapidly through Confederation universities. Standard laws and currencies facilitated commerce across vast distances. By 400 BCE, the Mediterranean Confederation had achieved a level of political sophistication, economic integration, and social stability that our timeline wouldn't match until the late 20th century European Union, 2,400 years later. Global exploration. With political stability achieved and industrial technology advancing, the alternative timeline entered an age of exploration around 450 BCE, 2,000 years before our timeline's age of discovery. Mediterranean ships, powered by both sail and steam engines, were the most advanced vessels ever built. They were capable of true oceanic voyaging, not coastal hugging, but open ocean navigation using precise astronomical instruments and mathematical charts. Between 450 and 400 BCE, Confederation explorers circumnavigated Africa, reached India by sea, explored the Baltic, and sailed west into the Atlantic. In 423 BCE, a Confederation expedition led by a Greek captain named Heraclion reached the Americas, landing somewhere near modern Brazil. The contact occurred 1900 years before Columbus, but it looked fundamentally different. Recent breakthroughs in studying this timeline suggest that Confederation explorers approached the Americas not as conquistadors, but as merchants and scholars. They established trading posts rather than colonies, exchanged goods rather than conquering, and documented indigenous cultures rather than destroying them. Why the difference? Because the Confederation's philosophical foundations emphasized universal human rights and dignity. Its prosperity came from trade, not extraction. Its scientific culture valued learning about new peoples rather than subjugating them. The Columbian exchange of crops, animals, and diseases still occurred, but gradually, over centuries rather than explosively. American populations experienced devastating mortality from Eurasian diseases, but at 20 to 30% rate rather than 90%, and over multiple generations with time to adapt. By 300 BCE, regular maritime traffic connected the Mediterranean to the Americas. Indigenous American civilizations became trading partners in a genuinely global economy. The scientific acceleration. The implications of global connection and continued institutional stability were revolutionary. By 350 BCE, alternative timeline science had achieved understanding equivalent to our early 20th century. Physics. Atomic theory was well developed, though nuclear physics remained unknown. Electromagnetism was understood and applied. Thermodynamics was formalized. Biology. Evolution by selective nature was established scientific consensus by 400 BCE, 2200 years before Darwin. Genetics was being systematically studied by 350 BCE. The first microscopes appeared around 370 BCE, enabling cellular biology. Medicine. Vaccination was standard practice by 400 BCE, antiseptic surgery by 380 BCE. Antibiotics, penicillin equivalents discovered through systematic study of molds by 350 BCE. Average life expectancy in the Confederation reached 55 years, comparable to our 1900 CE. Technology. Electricity was harnessed by 380 BCE. Telegraph systems connected major cities by 350 BCE. Mechanical computers, advanced calculating engines, existed by 340 BCE. Photography was invented around 320 BCE. But the most profound development was methodological. The scientific method itself became institutionalized. Confederation universities operated on principles of experimental verification, peer review, and systematic publication that wouldn't emerge in our timeline until the 17th century CE. Science became not just a pursuit of elite scholars, but a systematic, institutionalized process of knowledge creation, 1900-plus years before our scientific revolution. Changes in demographic. These advances produced a demographic transformation that reshaped the ancient world. In our timeline, global population around year 1 was approximately 300 million. In the alternative timeline, already several hundred years before Common Era, corresponding to our timeline's same era, global population exceeded 500 million. Why? Medicine reduced childhood mortality from 40 to 50% to 15 to 20%. Industrial agriculture increased food production. Improved sanitation reduced disease. Conquest and warfare declined within the vast Confederation peace zone. But this created new challenges. Faster population growth stressed resources. Environmental degradation became a serious concern.
The Confederation had to develop sustainability practices and population management strategies millennia before our timeline faced similar challenges. By 250 BCE, Confederation cities implemented the first environmental regulations, pollution controls, forest management, fishery quotas, and urban planning to prevent overcrowding. Birth control methods, known from ancient times but now promoted systematically, became widely available. It was humanity's first confrontation with the challenges of advanced civilization, and they had nearly 2,000 years more experience dealing with them than our timeline.
Act 4. Let there be. Paradox of progress. The most profound implications emerge when we consider what this alternative timeline reveals about the costs and benefits of unbroken civilizational progress. By 200 BCE in the alternative timeline, corresponding to our late Roman Republic era, they had achieved technological sophistication comparable to our 1920s. By 100 BCE, their understanding matched our mid-20th century. By year 1, they stood at technology levels we associate with the 1970s or 1980s. They had electricity, telecommunications, industrial chemistry, advanced medicine, environmental science, and were on the verge of achieving nuclear physics and computing. But they also confronted existential challenges earlier than our timeline. Environmental crisis. The Confederation faced the first climate change crisis caused by industrial carbon emissions 1,900 years before our timeline. They had to develop renewable energy and carbon capture technologies or face catastrophic environmental collapse. Weapons of mass destruction. They have achieved nuclear fission 1,850 years before our Manhattan Project. The ethical questions about atomic weapons emerged in a world with 800 years of continuous ethical philosophy to grapple with them. Artificial intelligence. By 150 CE, their mechanical computers had evolved into primitive but functional artificial thinking machines. The philosophical questions about consciousness, rights, and the nature of humanity arrived in a society with extensive prior experience thinking about such matters. Each existential crisis that our timeline faced in the 20th, 21st centuries, the alternative timeline confronted over a millennium earlier, but with vastly more accumulated wisdom to address them.
Dilemma of choice. This leads to history's most profound question. Were they better prepared to handle advanced technology than we are? The evidence suggests both yes and no. Yes, because 1,500 plus years of continuous philosophical development meant sophisticated ethical frameworks existed before dangerous technologies emerged. Democratic institutions were mature and stable. Scientific culture was deeply embedded. International cooperation mechanisms had been tested and refined over centuries. The alternative timeline never experienced the catastrophic world wars that characterized our 20th century. When they faced nuclear weapons, they had the wisdom to limit them through international agreement. When they confronted environmental crisis, they had established institutions to coordinate global responses. When AI emerged, they had 2,000 years of philosophy to draw upon in addressing its implications. But no, because rapid progress created its own problems. Each generation faced disruptions our timeline spread over millennia. Social change happened constantly. Traditional cultures worldwide struggled to adapt. Inequality persisted despite advanced technology, concentrated in the Mediterranean and connected regions, while other areas remained less developed. By 200 CE, the alternative timeline faced a crisis our timeline has barely begun addressing. What happens when human civilization reaches such technological advancement that it must fundamentally transform its relationship with nature, with work, with human identity itself?
Singularity. What historians discovered next challenges everything about how we understand human destiny. Around 250 CE in the alternative timeline, corresponding to our crisis of the 3rd century, they achieved what futurists in our timeline call the technological singularity, the point where artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence and technological progress becomes effectively infinite. The alternative timeline humans, with 1,500 years of continuous philosophical development, had been preparing for this moment for generations. They had debated the nature of consciousness, the ethics of creating thinking machines, the question of whether artificial minds deserved rights. When their AI systems achieved sentience around 250 CE, they didn't panic. They were much more prepared. They created hybrid human-AI governance systems. They used AI to solve problems that had seemed intractable: disease, aging, resource scarcity, even death itself. Much of this was because AI was properly controlled and segmented. There was no all-controlling superintelligence, but it was being used as small superclusters. By 300 CE, the alternative timeline had effectively transcended biological limitations. Human lifespans extended to 200+ years through genetic engineering and cybernetic enhancement. Scarcity was eliminated through advanced geoengineering. They had achieved what our timeline might call utopia, or post-humanity. But they had also lost something essential: the human struggle that defined existence for all previous history. Without scarcity, conflict, or death, what remained of the human experience?
Conclusion. We began this journey asking, what if the Bronze Age never collapsed? What if crisis didn't break civilizational continuity? We've seen a world where ancient civilizations survived, where progress never stopped, where humanity reached advanced technology millennia before our own timeline, where democracy emerged 2,000 years early, where science became systematic 1,500 years early, where humanity confronted existential challenges with the wisdom of continuous philosophical development. It's a world many would choose over our own, a world where the Dark Ages never darkened, where human knowledge cascaded unbroken through millennia, where catastrophic world wars never devastated civilization because mature institutions prevented them. But we've also discovered something unsettling: that unbroken progress leads to transformation so profound that humanity itself becomes something unrecognizable. The alternative timeline's humans of 300 CE, augmented by technology, partnered with AI, freed from scarcity and death, were as different from Bronze Age humans as we are from our prehistoric ancestors. Perhaps both timelines reveal complementary truths. Continuous progress creates wisdom and prevents catastrophe, but cyclical collapse and recovery creates resilience and preserves something essentially human. Our timelines suffered through dark ages, but perhaps those struggles kept us grounded in the human condition longer. The historical consensus recognizes that civilizational collapse, for all its horrors, isn't purely destructive. It creates hunger for recovery, resilience through adversity, and appreciation for what's been lost. The alternative timeline achieved utopia, but at the cost of transformation beyond humanity itself. The Bronze Age kings stand at the brink of collapse in 1200 BCE, watching their world burn. In one timeline, ours, they failed, and human history took the path of collapse and recovery, darkness and renaissance, loss and rediscovery. In the alternative timeline, they survived, and history followed an unbroken path toward technological transcendence, achieving in 1,500 years what our timeline has barely begun approaching after 3,200 years. Which world is better? Which path is more human? The history contains infinite possibilities. The civilizations that might have been are countless. The paths we never walked extend infinitely. But in every timeline, one truth remains. that humanity's greatest test isn't whether we survive crisis, but what we choose to become when we do. And perhaps the real question isn't which timeline achieved more, but whether achieving everything means losing something irreplaceable about what makes us human. Would you have been the Bronze Age scribe who chose to preserve knowledge instead of fleeing? Would you have been the Egyptian soldier who fought to stabilize foreign kingdoms instead of securing your own borders? Would you have been the philosopher who warned about technology transcending humanity, even as progress seemed inevitable? These choices between security and solidarity, between tradition and transformation, between human limitations and post-human potential, are choices our own civilization increasingly faces. And how we answer determines not just what kind of future we build, but whether that future remains recognizably human at all.